brain tries to take shortcuts to get answers to very complex questions.
Personally, I feel that one of the bigger goals in life has to be the retirement corpus.
When you think about professionals and entrepreneurs, they don't stop working.
Scooty में कितना डालना चाहिए? Is there something like that?
Bilkul. There is definitely thumb rules. What's the point of 10 crores in the bank if you're going to be, on an ICU bed? To start somewhere as early as you can.
Hi everyone, I'm Anup Guladi, Head of Marketing at PGIM India Mutual Funds. Welcome to Money Buddy, brought to you by Money and Me, an investor education initiative by PGIM India Mutual Funds. In today's episode, we'll be talking about thumb rules of investing. Thumb rules are basically simple yet powerful techniques to help you in your financial journey. To discuss these thumb rules, we have with us Ajit Menon, CEO of PGIM India Mutual Funds. Welcome, Ajit.
Thank you, Anup. Happy to be here.
Well, we are starting. My first basic question is, how do you go about financial planning? What are the basic first steps of financial planning?
I think first is to recognize that you need financial planning in whichever status of life that you might be. It is important to have a plan for your finances so that you can have all of your goals that you think in your life that you need to is well organized into the future. And I think that when you think about the steps of financial planning, one of the most important aspects, there are four. I would say that there's a sequence to it, and that's an important sequence for people to remember. And it starts with really budgeting. After budgeting, when you look at your expenses and how much money is there as a surplus, your next step should ideally be protection or insurance, making sure that you have health as well as life insurance. With further surpluses, you basically make sure that you have an emergency fund that you can set up, which is very critical, I do think, for our audience, for anybody. And once you've set up your emergency fund, then you look about, getting to your investment products and picking up the different asset classes that you have. So the critical, real first step is household budgeting.
Okay. So while we are talking about household budgeting, and you talked about going on to protection and going further on to emergency funds, is there a ballpark number on how much is the emergency corpus supposed to be for individuals, or it varies from person to person?
Well, as far as the emergency corpus is concerned, it can vary as a sense. So if you read a lot of financial literature which is related to personal finance, people would say that you should at least have 6 months of your expenses kept aside in a sort of safe investment option. It can be a fixed deposit as well, or any good fixed income fund at like a liquid fund or so, that you can do that. There are advisors who would go on to say that it would be better to be more conservative and have at least 1 year, if not more, 1 year to 18 months of your expenses kept aside in an emergency fund. And I think that that's coming from the fact that there could be different sort of exigencies that can happen in life. What if there's a sudden job loss and you're going to take time? It's a bad time for the economy. So sometimes 6 months may just not sort of cut it. But my sort of advice to people has been, Anup, that you start somewhere. So you can even start with as low as keeping 3 months of your expenses aside, and then keep building on that emergency corpus to make sure that you have 6 months or a year as you have those surpluses building up for yourself, or you're making gains in your investment portfolio. You take some profit off the table and make sure that your emergency fund is quite robust. So I think that's the approach that I would give. Of course, in budgeting, there is also thumb rules that one can follow, and it's called the 50-30-20 thumb rule. And thumb rules, Anup, as you just mentioned at the start, is important because our brain anyway finds all of these financial information quite complex. And so it's just human evolution that we try to take shortcuts. Our brain tries to take shortcuts to get answers to very complex questions. So I think a session like this and talking about some of these kind of shortcuts are helpful at a very broad level, and then you can always do something specific for yourself with an advisor. But 50-30-20 as a thumb rule for budgeting essentially means that from your take-home salary or whatever is your income in a month, you try and manage all of your expenses, including all of your needs and wants. I'm not just talking about the needs, but sometimes also of the wants. Try and keep that to 50% of your take-home salary. And then with the balance 50%, you split that into 30 and 20. 30% ideally should be the limit of the EMIs, if any, that you have taken, right? So you could have a home loan, you could have a car loan, you could have various kinds of loans that you could have taken. It is advisable to sort of maintain that to about 30% of your take home. And then the balance 20% you save. A lot of people feel that, 20% saving, but then, at what age group do you do what? If you're in the salaried class, for a lot of people, maybe in our audience, then what happens is that you're already, probably putting money aside towards your PF, right? And I feel that in your 20s and 30s, it's, you're going to live your life as well. You want to enjoy your life as well. So it's okay to have about between 10 and 20% as your savings. So
apart from PF.
Apart from PF, right? So that's right. So even if it's a 10%, it's okay because there's PF money going there. But then when you get into your 30s and you will start a life, you'll get married, you have kids in a normal scenario, let's assume it that way. Then you start looking at maybe about 20%, and then in the 30s you look for, in the 40s you look for 30%, and in your 50s you look for 40%, because as you get older, hopefully some of your commitments are getting done, your kids are getting educated, all of that is done, or your home loans are probably done with, so your capacity to save more increases. So if you were to think of it as a thumb rule, as a simple way, start with 10% savings there in your 20s. When you're in your 30s, do 20%. In your 40s, do 30%. In your 50s, do 40%. So minus 10, right? Yeah. It's easier to remember.
Yeah, that's a good thumb rule, I would say. So while we are talking about the 20 number, and let's stick on to 20 for the sake of convenience. Nowadays, if you look at people are more inclined towards putting their money into equities. So whether it is stocks or shares or mutual funds. How is it that somebody should decide how much is going towards equity and how much is going towards something else? Is there a thumb rule around that? Ki equity mein kitna dalna chahiye? Is there something like that?
Bilkul. There is definitely thumb rules on equity and what you can do and how you can probably cut your investments and how decide that asset allocation. And the simple rule is, more easier to remember, is to use the formula of 100 minus your age. And that's the percentage, 100 minus your age, whatever is the number that you get, should be the percentage of your savings that goes towards equities. And the rest should be kept in safer investments, so to speak, relatively safer. So in this scenario, if it's a 30-year-old person, 100 minus 30, you could afford to put 70% of that savings that you have into equity products. Of course, here's where a good financial advisor comes of very good use, which is that based on your personal situation, you may have siblings to take care of, you may have older parents at home, you may have medical situations at home, and therefore the kind of portfolios that you invest into, how aggressive or conservative should I think be a conversation with a financial advisor. But just as a thumb rule, 100 minus age is a great way to sort of start. And therefore, if you are in your 60s, it doesn't mean that you stop investing in equity, according to me, because it helps you obviously to keep pace with inflation. So if you're a 60-year-old, 100 minus 60, you try and make sure that you have at least 40% in equity and 60% of your savings is in more relatively safer products.
Superb. So personally, I feel that one of the bigger goals in life has to be the retirement corpus, because that's once you retire,
you're a rare breed then.
So once you retire, you've got a long age to follow in and utilize that money for your use. So is there a rule around the retirement fund also? How is it that one should approach that?
Well, I think there is the obvious conventional sort of advice as far as retirement goes. And again, if you were to look at a thumb rule for that, you look at what possibly is going to be your expenses at the age of 60, assuming that people think about retirement by the time they get to 60, they have done with a 9-to-5 job and they want to do something. When you think about professionals and entrepreneurs, they don't stop working. They enjoy their work. It's their passion, so they can continue working. The way to think about it in terms of how to plan for that is in the conventional way, like I said, is to think about what is likely to be the expenses when you turn 60 and assume that the expenses are, inflation adjusted, and you have enough calculators online that you can look at and use and get to this number, whatever be that number. Let's assume for a moment, for simplicity's sake, it's 10 lakhs. Just let's take 10 lakhs. Then I think what you need is at least between 20 and 30 times of that expense kept in a corpus from which you're withdrawing your monthly expenses. So coming back to that example, I'm just assuming that your annual 1 year's expense is 10 lakhs. And so you would need between 20 and 30 times. So you need somewhere between 2 crores and 3 crores as a corpus. That should probably be good enough from a retirement perspective if you've planned for it. And that's how conventionally one would approach it. 20 to 30 times the expenses by the time you're 60. And therefore, since a lot of people like to retire early or want to retire early, you do the same thing. You think about what your expenses is going to be at 40, and then if it's 40 and you think that you're going to live for another 40 years, then you will need 40 times of that expense kept aside someplace, right? So that's the way to think about it. But I do think that a lot of people don't prioritize retirement because these numbers look pretty big and pretty ridiculous, and you wonder, am I even going to get to that number? So you sort of stop. You don't even start getting onto that journey because that number looks so large.
You try to kick the can further into
exactly.
the future.
And that's just a human way of thinking about it. You can't think so much into the future. There are so many behavioral biases that come in the way. My advice there is obviously to start somewhere as early as you can, and don't worry so much about that number, because I think the anxiety about this number comes from the fact that a lot of people believe, I'm going to stop doing everything at a particular age and not do anything to earn anything for the rest of the time. I think that's a mistake that people make. I think that when you think about today's world and you think about the fact that people will live longer, like you said, I think it's also important for people to feel healthy when they live that long, right? So that's important. So when we talk about health, which needs to be with you for that long period, then you're talking of both mental and physical. It's one thing, but it's both mental and physical health. And being purposeful, being engaged, being physically active is very, very important into retirement, more than the money, right? What's the point of 10 crores in the bank if you're going to be, on an ICU bed for like 5 years of the, last part of your life? That doesn't work, right? That's not the picture you have. So I think it's important to keep in mind that what is it that you will be engaged with? How will you keep yourself physically active and purposeful doing something? And my advice would be, find something from which you can even make some money from it. All of us, for instance, Anup, can teach, right? Or we might be fitness enthusiasts and we could probably get a certification for being a fitness instructor or a yoga instructor or whatever that is. So many people have so many hobbies, and I think monetizing those hobbies helps you stretch your retirement income clearly for in a much better way, but it also keeps you active and purposeful, and therefore you meet both the goals of retirement. In this conventional picture that we talked about earlier, you sort of retire at 60, you think about a corpus. A lot of people have a honeymoon period for a couple of years, and then you start seeing blood pressure, diabetes, or some sort of health issue that comes up. And I think that comes up from not being physically active and mentally active. So I think that there's a fine balance there, and it's I think the advice therefore from a retirement perspective, the way to think about it is not just thinking about 20 to 30 times of your expenses as a corpus to build at the age of 60. You got to think about the skills you have that you can monetize, things that you can work with. You can retire from your primary career and then have a secondary career. And I think when you keep the saving thumb rules in mind from even those incremental incomes, you should be in a good place for your retirement.
Superb. Life shouldn't stop at 60.
Absolutely.
So one question that I have is, which is out of the financial book. When did you started thinking about your retirement planning?
That's a good question, Anup, because I should thank myself to have found myself into a career in the mutual fund world. But once I got into mutual funds and I met with a lot of financial planners and advisors, that's when I realized that it's important, important to plan. And I think in that journey somewhere, because I was called upon to speak to audiences, and one would speak the conventional thing about have a financial plan, have an advisor, think about financial goals, your children's education, your retirement, your house, and you need to be planned around it. I stopped for a moment and said, one second, if somebody were to, in the audience, ask me, do you do it? The answer would have been no at that time, right? And so I think I saw the value in it for sure. And I made sure about 15, 18 years ago that I sat down with a couple of financial planners, selected the one that I felt the most comfortable with, and then sat with him and made my financial plan for my family and for myself, and then got on to that journey. And I haven't looked back. I have no regrets. I'm extremely happy with the fact that I started, even if it's just 15 years ago, and I'm 53 now, but it was just 15 years ago that I started being planned about it. I was investing and saving before that, but doing it in a more planned manner. I think it has huge benefits because it takes away the anxiety of would you have enough for sending your kids if they were to go abroad for studies or even in India, or would you have enough to invest into your house or for your retirement for that instance. So I would say about between 15 and 18 years ago is when I started getting into a financial plan.
Superb. Any last advice that you would have, final advice for our viewers?
Yes, Anup, what I would say is that it's a complex subject. There's a lot of content around this, I'm sure.
Correct.
And a lot of people, feel anxious even after listening to all of it because they just don't know where to start, right? And while they can intuitively and with common sense think about, okay, budgeting and then insurance and then have an emergency fund and then start some SIPs or, investing, it is still a little complex, and you get swung by the kind of messages you see or what you see on TV or what you read in the newspapers. To me, I think that final piece of advice would be get yourself a good financial advisor. Right. Talk to a few people, get some references from your friends and family if they are using financial advisors. You have to get somebody who is in sync with your sort of thought process, right? And who's qualified and competent. So you can take the testimonials from some of their clients and then start that journey of being planned around goals rather than just having money and trying to build a corpus. I think that will, I believe, reduce financial anxiety the most.
Yeah, superb. You have a financial advisor for yourself, so that's superb. So thank you, Ajit, for your valuable inputs, and we hope that our viewers will take insights from this session. And thank you, viewers, for joining us today. Just remember that thumb rules are the basic guidelines. They are not the overall perspective. They are not the overall thing on designing your financial plans. For that, you should get in touch with a financial advisor. That's it for this episode. Until next time, keep investing. Thank you.
Money Buddy Podcast, brought to you by Money and Me, an investor and education awareness initiative by PGIM India Mutual Fund.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.